All right, so today we're going to dive deep into SpaceX.
Okay.
You sent in a really comprehensive Wikipedia entry
Yeah.
on SpaceX, and
It's a lot.
yeah, it's a lot to kind of parse through. So hopefully we can kind of extract like the most
The good stuff. Yeah.
interesting stuff, the important stuff
Totally.
for you guys.
Yeah, and it covers everything from their origins and history obviously
Yeah,
to the hardware they've developed, like the rockets, the spacecraft,
yeah,
Starlink, that whole mega constellation of satellites,
yeah.
all their facilities, the contracts that they've won,
Mm-hmm.
some of the challenges and investigations they've had.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very comprehensive.
Yeah. So this is like a deep dive within a deep dive.
Yeah, exactly.
And for you, the listener, it's not about like,
You're not going to be a rocket scientist.
yeah, you're not gonna be a rocket scientist,
After this,
but you're gonna be able to like
you'll be able to hold a conversation.
hold a conversation about it and
Yeah, and impress your friends.
impress your friends. Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so where should we even begin with this?
I think I should start at the very beginning.
Yeah, yeah, at the genesis, like the early days of SpaceX.
Yeah.
So this is, like early 2000s, like 2001, 2004.
Yeah.
Elon Musk, has this vision to establish a self-sustaining colony on Mars.
Okay.
And so he's like, how can I drastically reduce the cost of space travel?
Right.
And so his initial thought wasn't even like I'm going to build a rocket. It was, I'm going to buy a rocket.
He tried to buy one, right?
Yeah, so a Deneb rocket
Yeah, a Russian rocket.
from Russia.
Yeah.
And
it didn't work out.
And it didn't work out. So he went there a couple times.
Yeah, once with Jim Cantrell, who's a well-known space guy.
Mhm.
And then another time with Michael Griffin, who eventually became the head of NASA.
Wow.
And yeah, they met with a bunch of Russian contacts and basically lowballed them, I guess.
Yeah, and they weren't really taking him seriously.
Yeah.
And so the story goes that on the flight back from one of those trips,
Yeah.
Musk is just like, I can do this myself. I'm gonna start a company and build the affordable rockets that we need.
Yeah, forget these guys. I'm going to do it myself. So it's kind of a classic origin story, right?
Yeah.
Very audacious.
Yeah. And he wasn't even just like, I'm going to build rockets. It was like, I'm going to change how they're built.
Yeah.
So SpaceX from the very beginning had these core principles to reduce costs.
Right.
One of which was vertical integration. So bringing
Yeah.
as much of the design and manufacturing in-house as possible.
Yeah.
And so that's not only for cost-saving measures, but it also gives you a lot more control
Yeah.
over your supply chain.
Exactly.
And then also they would try to use off-the-shelf commercial components wherever possible.
Right. Right.
And then they also adopted a modular.
Yeah, almost software engineering
Right.
approach to rocket design.
Which is interesting because the traditional players.
Yeah, Boeing and Lockheed and all those guys.
With very bespoke, specialized parts.
Yeah.
And very different approach.
Right.
And so to realize his vision, he obviously needed a team.
Yeah.
And so he recruited some of the early key employees from TRW, Boeing. And he reportedly was very hands-on in this process.
Yeah. Personally interviewing candidates for all the key positions.
And so one of the guys he brought in was Tom Mueller,
Okay.
who became their CTO and was very instrumental in their engine development.
Okay.
And then also Gwynne Shotwell, who is now the president and COO.
Yeah, she's been there forever, it feels like.
Yeah. And Chris Thompson.
Okay.
And so his initial goal
Yeah.
was to decrease the cost of accessing space by a factor of 10,
Oh, wow.
while also improving reliability.
So not just making it cheaper, but also making it
Better.
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 A huge undertaking.
So, now they have the vision, they have the people. This next period is from 2005 to 2009. And this was all about proving that they could actually get a rocket into space.
Right, they got to prove themselves.
Yeah, so this was the development of their first rocket, the Falcon 1.
Okay.
And that cost them $90 to $100 million.
So that was all internally funded?
Yeah, all internally funded.
Wow.
And
the name Falcon, that's from Star Wars, right?
yeah, a lot of people will recognize that from the Millennium Falcon.
Okay.
And so, the path wasn't all smooth sailing.
Yeah.
SpaceX actually protested a NASA contract.
Oh, okay.
that was given as a sole source to another company.
Okay. So
And
that other company already had like the contract.
yeah.
And they were like, no, that's not fair. We should be able to compete.
Yeah, and so before the government even responded, NASA actually withdrew that contract
Wow.
and ended up creating the COTS program, which is the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Program.
Right.
And so this is really important because this opened the door
Yeah.
for private companies
To be like real players.
to supply the International Space Station, or the ISS.
Right.
And then in 2006, SpaceX was actually selected
Right.
for COTS contracts, which gave them $396 million to demonstrate that they can deliver cargo to the ISS.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's a big vote of confidence.
Yeah,
from
NASA. But developing the Falcon 1 wasn't easy.
Right.
The first 3 launch attempts all failed
Oh, no.
between 2006 and 2008.
So they're like burning through this money.
Yeah, and it was really putting a strain
And
on
finances.
not only SpaceX, but Tesla
Yeah.
and Elon Musk personally.
Right, because he's funding a lot of this stuff himself.
Yes.
Right? So what happened next?
So then the 4th attempt in September of 2008,
Okay.
that was their turning point.
They finally did it.
Yeah, they finally had a successful launch of the Falcon 1. And then just a couple months later, NASA awarded them a $1.6 billion CRS contract,
Wow.
which is a commercial resupply services contract
Okay.
to actually start delivering cargo to the ISS.
Right.
And so this essentially saved the company.
Yeah, they were on the ropes.
Yeah.
And that big contract came through.
Yeah.
Really clutch.
And so
So the Falcon 1 worked.
the Falcon 1 worked. They actually ended up retiring the Falcon 1 after its second successful launch.
Okay.
And they decided to just concentrate all their resources on developing the larger Falcon 9.
Okay.
Uh,
So they were like, we did it. We proved it.
Yeah.
Now let's move on.
yeah, we proved the
Get
concept.
the bigger one.
Let's move on to the bigger one.
Yeah.
And it's also worth noting here that Gwynne Shotwell
Yeah.
was promoted to president in large part due to her role
Getting that contract.
in securing that CRS contract.
Wow. Good for her.
Okay, so now we're in the 2010 to 2012 range.
Okay.
And this was the racket development. And the initial successes of the Falcon 9 and the Dragon spacecraft.
Okay.
And so NASA's commitment through that CO test program really accelerated their ambitions.
Okay.
So NASA gave them $278 million for developing the Dragon, the Falcon 9, and doing these demonstration launches.
Okay.
So the Falcon 9 launched for the first time in June of 2010.
Okay.
And then the first operational Dragon spacecraft was launched in December of 2010.
Okay.
And it successfully completed all of its planned mission objectives.
Wow. They're on a roll.
Yeah. So by December of 2010, they were already producing 1 Falcon 9 and 1 Dragon every 3 months.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
They ramped up production really quickly.
Yeah.
So did they start working on like crew at this point?
Yeah. So in 2011, NASA actually gave them another $75 million
Wow.
to develop an integrated launch escape system for the Dragon spacecraft.
Right.
And so this would be critical for making it safe
Yeah.
for human
To
spaceflight.
carry people
Yeah.
so they can get certified.
And so by early 2012,
Yeah.
the company's valuation was significantly increased.
Yeah, they're doing well at this point.
Yeah. And Musk reportedly owned 2/3 of the company
Oh, wow.
at this point.
Okay.
And then came the really historic Dragon C2 Plus launch in May of 2012.
Okay.
And this was the first time that a commercial spacecraft
Right.
had successfully delivered cargo to the ISS.
Wow, that's a big milestone.
Huge milestone.
Yeah.
So
So at this point, how much money have they gone through?
they've gone through about $1 billion in total funding over that first decade
Okay.
of operation.
And that includes the money from Musk and
Yeah.
also...
Yeah, and a lot of private equity investment.
Wow. Okay, so they've had a lot of support
Yeah.
from investors.
And then late in 2012,
Mhm.
they actually started their reusability test program.
Okay.
And so they were doing these low altitude vertical takeoff and landing tests.
Right.
So this is landing the rocket back on Earth
Right.
after it's gone up.
So they were working on that pretty early on.
Yeah, from the very beginning.
Interesting.
Okay, so now we're in the 2013 to 2015 range.
Okay.
And this is where SpaceX really expanded commercially.
Okay.
So they're showing that their capabilities and their pricing is starting to attract customers other than NASA.
Right. So they're not just reliant on government contracts.
Right.
They're getting private customers.
Yeah, so in 2013, they actually did their first commercial mission.
Okay.
for a private customer.
Right.
And then by 2014, they were winning 9 out of 20 globally competed launch contracts.
Wow. So they're getting a lot of business. They're
Yeah.
competing internationally.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And their impact was particularly noticeable in the U.S. military launch market.
Okay.
So for almost a decade, that was dominated by a single player, the United Launch Alliance, or ULA.
Okay.
And so SpaceX's competitive pricing started to put pressure on ULA.
Right, because they had like a monopoly
Yeah, pretty good.
before SpaceX came along. And so how did they respond?
So ULA's launch costs were reportedly, quite high.
Yeah.
And
So they had to like lower their prices to compete?
yeah, they had to get more competitive on price.
Okay.
And then in September of 2014, NASA awarded SpaceX the CCT CAP contract,
Oh, okay. What is that?
which is the Commercial Crew Transportation Capability contract.
Okay.
And that was specifically for them to finalize the development of their
yeah.
crew transportation system.
Right, for getting astronauts to the space station.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then in January of 2015,
Mm-hmm.
SpaceX raised $1 billion in funding.
Wow. Another $1 billion.
Yeah, from Google and Fidelity Investments.
Huge.
And so that valued the company at like $12 billion.
Okay.
And then also in that same month, they publicly announced this project to build Starlink.
Okay, so this is the satellite internet constellation.
Okay.
So everything's going great, and then...
And then in June of 2015,
Oh, no.
the Falcon 9 experienced its first major in-flight failure. This was during the CRS-7 mission,
Oh.
which was another resupply flight for NASA to the ISS.
Oh, wow.
And so the investigation found that a steel strut inside the rocket's upper stage had failed.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that was a big purchase.
Yeah, so that was the first major failure of the Falcon 9.
Yeah.
Um,
So did they figure out what happened?
yeah. So they did a thorough investigation,
Okay.
and they figured out it was that steel strut that failed.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're moving into the 2015 to 2017 range.
Okay.
And this is when SpaceX achieved some really critical milestones
Yeah.
in reusability.
With landing the rockets.
Yeah.
Right.
So in December of 2015, they had their first successful landing and recovery
Of a Falcon 9.
of a Falcon 9 first stage back on land at Cape Canaveral.
Wow.
And then just a few months later, in April of 2016,
Yeah.
they landed a Falcon 9 first stage
Okay.
on a drone ship.
Oh, wow. At sea.
Yeah, so one of their autonomous spaceport drone ships.
Right. Which is so cool, by the way.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I love watching those videos.
Yeah, so that's another huge milestone.
Yeah.
And so these landings really demonstrated the viability of reusable rocket technology.
Right. Like, it actually works.
Yeah, and they're actually saving money
Yeah.
doing this.
So by October 2016, were they, offering discounts?
Yeah, so by October of 2016, they were offering a 10% discount to customers who would fly their payloads
Oh, wow. Okay.
on a reused Falcon 9 first stage.
So that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
10%.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. But then in September of 2016, they had another setback.
Oh, no.
So there was an explosion during a static fire test.
What's a static fire test?
So that's where they fire the engines.
Oh.
But the rocket is held down.
Oh, okay. So it was on the ground.
Yeah, it was on the ground at Cape Canaveral.
And it exploded.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And that destroyed the AMOS 6 communication satellite that was on top of it.
Oh, so they lost the payload too.
Yeah. And so that led to a 4-month pause in their launch operations.
Yeah. Of course, they got to figure out what happened.
While they investigated.
Yeah.
It turned out to be a failure of one of the helium tanks.
Oh, okay.
And so then in January of 2017, they successfully returned to flight.
Okay.
And then in March of 2017, they had another historic first.
Okay.
They relaunched a Falcon 9 first stage that had previously flown.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This was for the SES-10 satellite.
Okay.
And they successfully landed that reused first stage once again.
So they're really proving that reusability works at this point?
Yeah. So the 2017 to 2018 period really solidified SpaceX's position as the leading player in the commercial launch market.
So are they making a ton of money at this point?
Yeah. So in July of 2017, they raised another $350 million.
Wow.
Which valued the company at $21 billion.
Okay.
And then by the end of 2017,
Yeah.
they had achieved a 45% share of all awarded commercial launch contracts globally.
Wow. So almost half of the market.
And then by March of 2018, they had over 100 launches on their manifest.
Wow.
representing about $12 billion in contract revenue.
So they're like booked solid?
Yeah, so they were like the leading global commercial launch provider at that point.
Okay.
Um,
So what about other stuff? Like, did they start the Boring Company around this time?
yeah, so in 2017, they started the Boring Company.
Okay.
And it was focused on like building a test tunnel
Okay.
near their headquarters in Hawthorne.
Great.
And that eventually spun out as a separate entity in 2018.
Right.
With like, SpaceX and early employees getting some equity,
Yeah.
but Elon Musk holding the majority stake.
Makes sense.
Okay, so now we're into the 2019 to present range.
Right. So this is where things get really crazy.
Yeah, things start ramping up.
It's Starship and Starlink.
Yeah, so in 2019 alone, they raised $1.33 billion.
Wow.
And then they did more funding rounds in 2020 and 2021. And by October of 2021, the company was valued at over $100 billion.
Okay.
And a lot of this money was going to Starlink and Starship.
Okay.
And then Starship won a really crucial role in NASA's Artemis program
Okay.
in April of 2021.
So this is like the program to return to the moon?
Yeah, so Starship is going to be the human landing system
Oh, wow.
that will take astronauts down to the lunar surface.
Okay.
And then SpaceX has also made agreements with Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure
Okay.
to provide ground services for Starlink.
Right.
And then in July of 2021, they unveiled another drone ship,
Oh, cool.
which is named Shortfall of Gravitas.
I love the names of these drone ships.
Yeah.
It's so good.
And so 2022 is like a really busy year for them,
Yeah.
launch-wise.
Okay.
So the Falcon 9 actually set a world record for the most launches of a single vehicle type in a year.
Oh, wow.
They did 61 launches.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then in December of 2021, they announced a carbon dioxide removal program.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And then in August of 2022, because of that war in Ukraine, the ESA, so the European Space Agency,
Right.
was in discussions with SpaceX.
About using their rockets.
Yeah, because they were relying on Russian rockets
Yeah.
before that.
Okay.
And then in November of 2023, they acquired their longtime parachute supplier, Pioneer Aerospace.
Okay, so they're like vertically integrating even more.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then in July or August of 2024, they announced that they were relocating their headquarters
Oh, from Hawthorne.
from Hawthorne, California,
Texas.
to Starbase, Texas.
Wow, big move.
Yeah, and Elon Musk cited like concerns about California legislation as a reason.
Interesting.
And then in 2024, we saw the first ever private spacewalk
Oh, wow.
during the Polaris Dawn mission,
Okay.
which used SpaceX hardware.
That's prehistoric.
Yeah. And then just recently this year in 2025,
Yeah.
there's a report
Okay.
that came out about potential Chinese investor access into SpaceX.
Oh, through like third-party investment vehicles or something?
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And so that's raised some national security concerns in the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So Starship,
yeah, let's talk about some of these, like,
the big project.
the big projects.
Yeah.
So Starship.
Just like their baby, right?
Yeah.
This is the big one.
Yeah, this is a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
Back in 2019, they actually laid people off
Oh, really?
to free up resources for Starship and Starlink.
Wow. Okay, so they were that serious about it,
Yeah.
that they were willing to lay people off.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so Starship's purpose is basically to enable large-scale transportation to the moon, Mars, and beyond.
So like people in cargo?
Yeah, people and lots of cargo.
Okay.
And it's designed to be the largest and most powerful rocket ever built.
Okay.
So it can carry over 100 tons to orbit.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the development has been very iterative.
Lots of prototypes being built in Texas.
At Starbase.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we've seen a bunch of test flights
Yeah.
in 2023 and 2024.
Yeah, I remember that first orbital flight test.
Yeah, in April of 2023.
Yeah. What happened there?
So that ended prematurely with a midair explosion. But SpaceX said it was like a valuable learning experience.
Yeah.
They got a lot of data,
Okay.
even though multiple engines failed during ascent.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it was like a partial success,
Yeah.
but also a partial failure.
Yeah. And that first test flight did reach max Q.
Max Q, what is that?
So that's the point of maximum dynamic pressure
Okay.
during a flight.
So that's when the stresses on the rocket are the highest.
Yeah, so it's like a critical point in the flight.
Okay.
And then they had more test flights in November of 2023.
Okay.
And those also ended in explosions,
Oh,
but at different phases of the flight.
okay.
And then in March of 2024,
Mm-hmm.
Starship actually reached its intended orbital velocity for the first time,
Oh, wow. Okay.
but both the booster and the ship itself
Yeah.
were lost during descent.
Okay, so they didn't stick the landing.
No.
Okay.
And then as they've you know, been making these improvements and demonstrating progress to the FAA, they've been getting more streamlined launch licenses.
Oh, okay.
And so in October of 2024, they had their first successful tower catch
Oh, wow.
of the Super Heavy booster.
Okay. So that's the big first stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
And they caught it with like the arms.
yeah, with the tower arms.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Okay.
But, the testing continues to present challenges
Yeah.
just because it's such a complex system.
Right.
So they did more test flights in November of 2024, January of 2025, and March of 2025.
Okay.
So the January one, they actually did successfully catch the booster,
Okay.
but they lost contact with the Starship vehicle.
Oh, no.
Um,
So it like crashed.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then in March of 2025, similar thing. They lost communication with the spacecraft.
Okay.
It broke apart during descent.
Oh.
And so both of these led to mishap investigations by the FAA.
Yeah. So they're still working out the kinks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what about have they flown people yet?
Yeah. So another area where they've made huge progress is in crewed spaceflight.
Okay.
So the Crew Dragon Demo 2 mission in May of 2020 was a big milestone.
Okay.
They became the first private company to successfully send NASA astronauts
Wow.
to the ISS.
Okay.
And it was also the first crewed orbital launch from American soil in 9 years.
Wow.
So that was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, huge.
Um,
So what about Starlink? Where's that at?
yeah, so Starlink has become like a really important part of their business.
Yeah, it seems like it's going really well.
Yeah. So the first large batch of Starlink satellites was launched in May of 2019.
Okay.
And it's become the world's largest commercial satellite constellation.
Wow.
Providing, broadband internet.
To a growing number of people.
Okay.
And by 2022, they already had over 6,000 satellites in orbit.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of
Yeah.
satellites.
And then in July of 2021, they acquired Swarm Technologies,
Okay.
which provides low bandwidth connectivity for the Internet of Things.
Okay.
And then they've also gotten approval from the FCC
Okay.
to launch up to 7,500 next-generation Starlink satellites.
Wow. Okay, so they're not slowing down
No.
at all.
And then they've also introduced Starshield,
Okay.
which is basically Starlink, but for the military.
Oh, okay, so it's like a separate.
Yeah, a separate network.
Okay, yeah.
And then in June of 2024,
Yeah.
they unveiled the Starlink Mini,
Okay.
which is like a smaller, more portable antenna
Oh, cool.
for people who are on the move.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I think it's worth just
Stepping back.
stepping back and looking at the lists of their achievements.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So they were the first privately funded company to develop and launch a liquid-fueled rocket to reach orbit.
Okay.
The first private company to send a spacecraft to the ISS. The first to land and reuse orbital-class rockets.
Yeah.
The first to do a fully private crewed mission to orbit.
Wow.
And they hold the record for the most spacecraft launched on a single mission.
Wow. Okay, they've done a lot.
Yeah, they've done a lot.
A very short amount of time.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the rockets themselves.
Yeah, so they have a family of launch vehicles.
Right.
So they have the Falcon 1, which is retired now.
Okay.
The Falcon 9, which is their workhorse.
Yeah.
And then the Falcon Heavy.
Right, which is like 3 Falcon 9s strapped together,
Yeah.
basically.
And so the Falcon 9 is a medium lift vehicle.
Oh, okay.